The Iditarod to many can be looked at as a legacy, but to some, all they see is animal abuse. I believe that this amazing race is a race of endurance, bravery, tradition, teamwork, and so much more, but not animal abuse. The Iditarod is one of Alaska's greatest traditions, otherwise known as the last great race. Back when the tradition of dogs pulling sleds first began, it had an important purpose. Who's to say it doesn't still today? There are some rushers who have been running this race for many years. There are some who joined the race because family members before them have. And there are some who just want to get a taste of what Alaska is all about. However you look at it, this idea of one of Alaska's oldest traditions being considered as, and has been since the beginning, as animal abuse should be addressed before someone comes along and affects how the last great race is run. Abuse can be pulled out of many different contexts and can mean something different for everyone. According to dictionary.com, there's a few definitions that are used most. The definition that applies most to this issue is to treat in a harmful, injurious, or offensive way to or speak insultingly, harshly, and unjustly to or about. In summary, this definition is saying that for something to be abuse, that something would need to either be verbal or physical, that has become harmful to the object, although many others, and I don't see how this code word is connected with such a great tradition. The Iditarod first began in 1925, which gave us the famous statue and story of Balto. The race, to be considered the first official Iditarod race, happened in 1973, attracting 34 mushers to this 1,000-mile race, and in 1975 it became the largest sporting event. This race has been such an important part of Alaska's culture for so many decades, and probably so many more to come. In the article, The Iditarod No More Than Dog Abuse, from USA Today, by John Securino, interviews a woman from New York City named Marjorie Glickman, who is a professional animal rights activist. Glickman visits Alaska in hopes of discovering greatness, but becomes disgusted when she sees the living conditions of the sled dogs who run the Iditarod. Those conditions consisted of dogs living in their own filth, trapped in tiny kennels, tied on chains, only allowing them to go so far, forcing the dogs to run on large hamster wheels, and hooking the dogs up to all-terrain vehicles. Glickman calls all of these things abuse, although by definition, none of these living conditions can really actually fall under the category of abuse, unless these actions have become harmful to the dogs. There is no proof that these dogs are being injured or hate running on the life-size hamster wheel. Technically, there's no evidence for any of these conditions being harmful to the dogs, so how can these conditions really be called abuse? Fact is, they can't without some hard evidence to support their concern, especially if one's evidence comes from one of the only 70 mushers who run the Iditarod. According to Sled Dog Action Coalition, there was a total of 142 Iditarod dog-related deaths, 20 of them which include reported abuse incidents since 1973. This number may seem large, but it's also over the course of many decades. It's not like these dogs died from mental or physical abuse, like dogs that are found in dog pounds or in any rescue organization. They are dogs that died doing something they loved and were bred to do. 2009 Iditarod's head veterinarian technician, Jan Bullock, says just that. They live to run, and they really enjoy it, and they work as a pack and as a team. The dogs are completely aware of their surroundings, and they love it. The head vet from 2009 also said the most common injuries are skeletal and muscle issues that can be healed in 2 days to 2 weeks, and the dogs are more than ready to go. The dogs that are run in the Iditarod race also are taken care of, according to Bullock. When it gets windy, the mushers will put coats on the dogs and make sure all dogs have booties. These dogs mean more to the mushers than just a bunch of money, and they win. But they are considered as part of the family or even kids. Head veterinarian Stuart Nilsson from 2010, like Jan Bullock, had similar views on the issue. He says, anyone who has ever witnessed a sled dog race can attest to the enthusiasm that the sled dogs demonstrate for their sport. These past veterinarians are not the only ones that have seen this in the dogs. Fans, supporters, and viewers like myself can see the excitement in these dogs when they're ready to take off. They can barely stand still when they know it's time to run. Just this year, I was out at the trail at Crystal Lake near Willow, Alaska, watching part of the restart of the 2014 Iditarod, and one of the mushers started to lead his dogs down the wrong trail. As my family and I and many other onlookers yelled, "Wrong way, wrong way," he finally brings his team to a stop. and when the dogs were stopped, they instantly started doing the husky scream and yelp, while jumping around trying to start the running again. As many others and I assisted the musher in bringing his dogs back around, the yelping and bouncing around stopped. These dogs wanted to run. You could feel it and you could see it in the dog's body language. These dogs were not showing any characteristics of dogs that were in pain or being abused and were being abused by the cause of the race. Sled dogs certainly are bred and raised to run, and they often do seem thrilled to oblige. But separating any dog's love from work and its loyalty to humans isn't easy, and since racing is the only life sled dogs know, some animal advocates say they can't be considered as truly willing participants, says McLean. An Alaskan Husky is a type of husky that is bred specifically for the Iditarod. It is different from the classic Siberian Husky. I myself have an Alaskan Husky similar to the ones running the Iditarod. She is a loving family member. She may be fatter than the athletes running the race, but my dog loves to run and is more than willing to. Misty yelps and barks whenever there is an opportunity for her to run, and if she can't run, the yelping gets worse. She isn't the only dog I've seen this in. I work for a doggy daycare where I see various husky breeds come in, and when comparing them with a lab or any other breed, the energy and will to run is completely different than it is with the Alaskan Husky. Even if the sled dogs aren't given the choice to run these races, running is flowing through their veins, and somehow they would end up running somewhere. Just because we don't understand the dog language doesn't mean that dogs don't do what they want to do and make their own choices. We know dogs like to have fun and run, but this is a complete different scenario, said David Byer, senior corporate liaison from PETA. They're running for hours a day in brutal temperatures, and no animal is going to enjoy hypothermia. That is not something that is good for the dogs, no matter how they breed, he says. Yet, the Iditarod committee and mushers do everything they can during the race to assure the safety of the dogs and to minimize the number of deaths, but sometimes it just happens and sometimes it can't be prevented. For example, in the Iditarod 2014, beloved musher Dee Dee Johnrell scratched from the race because of the terrible conditions. It was just too much for me and my dog, said Dee Dee, at the Cabela's grand opening while signing autographs for her fans. Just listening to Dee Dee, you could talk about her dogs. You could tell right away that she cares so much for them, like they are part of her family. There are many other mushers like Dee Dee who do what they can during the race to assure the safety of their team. It's extremely rare that mushers will let their dogs get to the point of death, but it happens and it's part of life. Sergeant George, director of the public relations for the Iditarod, says exactly that. There's a thing called life and death, and it just happens like these athletes have one of the most caring safety nets I have ever seen in my life. It is proven that these dogs are well protected during the race, with various checkups, where each dog gets checked up and everything else they need for the race. At checkups during the race, dogs are examined again by the vets who hopscotch down the trail by bush plane to care for their dogs, performing about 10,000 routine exams. The dogs are extremely well cared for and are loved by everyone who participates in helping the Iditarod. Not only are these dogs checked up on during the race, but a few weeks before and a month as well. About a month before the race, the mushers take each of their dogs to their own vets around the state for screening lab work and electromammograms, which measures heart rhythm and activity. Blood work is also done on each dog to assure that all is normal in the dog's blood. Lastly, each dog is checked to make sure they are microchipped, and if they aren't microchipped, then they are microchipped, and if it's not an inactive microchip, then they put in a new one. Veterinarian technician will do anything they can. 14 days before the start of the race, physical exams on every dog considered for the race in the upcoming Iditarod are checked. Vets, volunteers from all over the country and sometimes all over the world. The examinations consist of checkups on the heart, hydration, attitude, weight, and lungs, as well as every dog who is running the Iditarod, its legs, paws, and temperature are also checked as well. There is much preparation that comes along with running the Iditarod, months of training for both the dogs and the mushers to get them prepared for the race. Each musher carefully plans out each training schedule for each season. Each musher has their own way of preparing for the big race. Some prepare by competing in shorter races to help improve the dogs and their own endurance. A team preparing for the race usually covers about 2,000 to 3,000 miles before the race. Since Alaska has 6 months out of the year without a fair amount of snow, mushers have to find other ways to train their dogs. In the dry seasons, mushers use all-terrain vehicles in place of the traditional dog sled used in the race. The question is how to revert this term abuse from being pointed towards the Iditarod. It's clear already that the Iditarod Committee does everything they can during the race, but a month prior to the race to ensure the safety of the dogs. Although some more monitoring or regulations of training for the off-season could be worked on. If this portion of the Iditarod was to be improved, it could lessen the population of people who believe in abuse. I'm sure the Iditarod Committee could get a good amount of volunteers who would be more than willing to go out to various different dog kennels of mushers who plan to participate in next year's Iditarod every couple months to assure that everything is up to par. In conclusion, the Iditarod is more than just a race to see who gets to the finish line faster. It is about a bond between the dog and the mushers while on the trail. The mushers and their teams demonstrate so many qualities that make up the Iditarod. Qualities of endurance, drive, bravery, tradition, teamwork, and much more. One thing the Iditarod is not is animal abuse. By definition, the Iditarod is not harming the animals in any way. If anything, the Iditarod Committee and volunteers do everything they can to ensure the safety of the dogs. The fact is, the term abuse being forced upon this race may not have a lasting effect now, but it could in the distant future. The Iditarod is a great tradition, and it's doubtful that anything permanent can permanently affect the race itself, but could potentially change people's opinions and views of the race from good to bad, which is not something that anyone who is a part of the Iditarod wants to happen. People who believe the race is abuse need to be reassured that the race is in fact not abuse. And if that doesn't work, precautions need to be taken to assure that more people don't side with the opposing group. The Iditarod is an amazing tradition that is not animal abuse and will continue on for many more years to come, regardless of others' beliefs.